when you open the door for somebody else.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Vaccine Conversation with Melissa and Dr. Bob.
And
a special guest. Yes.
Yay. I love when we do interviews.
I know you do, yeah.
And I've been working on this one for a while. He can attest to that. I've been texting him every now and then. Hey, what about this time?
Yeah, I think you told me like 3 months ago.
Yeah.
Hey, guess who I got to be on the podcast?
And today is the day. It's official. And if you guys don't recognize that laugh, which you probably don't unless you are super cool. But if you don't, we are talking today with Nico LaHood. And welcome to the show, Nico. We're going to give a little bio.
Thank you.
But welcome. We're so happy.
Thank you. I'm honored. I'm excited about the show. I love what you guys are doing. And fire away. I'm ready to get into this.
I have to laugh. I didn't tell Dr. Bob, but he's like, when I was like, oh, can you do this day? And he's like, okay, with Dr. Bob, right? I was like, yeah, I want it too. I'm kind of on the podcast too.
I love it. I love it.
He's like, what, are you going to be getting him water? Or
I love it.
Oh, he thought you were my secretary. Is that right?
Oh, no. I didn't know.
He thought I was just booking the podcast for you. Oh, that's.
I thought you were running the ship, and I didn't know.
I'm going to show you the podcast photo, Nico, because like I'm on, like my face is on it. Okay, like
you're it. You are
my
it.
face is on it too.
Nico,
Wow.
Nico, I was extremely wise enough to find somebody to podcast with who is way better than I am at pretty much everything there is to be.
Amen.
So,
Amen, brother.
Yeah, well, for those of you who don't know who Nicholas is, well, he goes by Nico.
Great.
He actually was the former district attorney for Bexar County in Texas. And he's actually a native of San Antonio, Texas, and he worked for 16 years as a criminal defense attorney and a prosecutor in the justice system there. And then he was elected as a district attorney. And he actually managed and led a legal team of over 500 members, which was pretty impressive. Let's see, you went to St. Mary's University and you got your degree in finance, and then you moved on and got your Juris Doctorate from St. Mary's School of Law, all right? St. Mary's.
Correct.
You basically worked, again, as a criminal defense lawyer for many years, representing people who, really needed a good defense lawyer. And then you spent some time as a district attorney, which you're going to want to talk to you about, of course.
Sure.
You actually served as a magistrate judge for Bexar County, and you held a position as a professor at St. Mary's School of Law, which is pretty cool. And you're also a special prosecutor for several of the counties neighboring Bexar County. So, wow, you have a lot of incredible experience in the legal system and very, many different aspects of the legal system. And then you were part of various police academies, including the SAPD, San Antonio Police Department Academy, and the Alamo Area Council of Governments.
Right.
And then you met your wife, you guys have 4 children, and then you really have a passion for giving back to your community, and you do a lot of guest speaking at universities, colleges, middle schools, high schools, trying to educate young adults about the justice system and its laws, and then you're a very religious man, a man of faith. You are very active in your church. You lead a Bible study, and I'm a fellow Christian man myself, Nico. So it's great to see that you are really dedicated to your family, your church, your friends, and some of your hobbies. It's kind of interesting. You are into fitness, martial arts, hunting, and shooting. As someone who's in a
Texan. That's a Texan.
Yeah, it's a Texan. Exactly. So, Nico, welcome. I'm very honored to have you on the show.
Dr. Bob, what's your doctorate in? Or what?
I'm a pediatrician.
Oh, nice. Good for you, man.
Yeah.
Wow. So you got some church bells, huh? I like that.
I love that you didn't know that. Because Dr. Bob thinks he's a celebrity, so it's really nice.
Oh, I'm sure he is. I'm just in it.
No, it's so nice when somebody's like, and who are you? Dr. Bob, what's your last name?
No.
It's great. I love it.
Melissa loves it when we find someone who doesn't think I'm a celebrity.
That was like one of the first things I said to him when I first met him. Like, just so you know, I'm not impressed with you like everybody else.
I love it.
You think she's kidding, but she's totally serious.
I actually did say that, but I was like, and I meant that in a respectful way.
No, right, totally.
Peer to peer, I respect you for what you bring to the table, but I am not sitting here on the other side of this like, oh, you're Dr. Bob Sears. Like I don't really do that with anybody.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to get this person to like me.
So he was reverse psychology. I got to start using that more.
I like it. Wow. So you're pediatric. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you're out there putting your neck out there on that deal.
Oh yeah. Big time.
Definitely on this issue for sure. And I'll say the reason that I thought of Nico is that I had originally seen the interview with from Vaxxed 1 from the first movie. And what I like so much about you and kind of what you brought to the table, and I told you this the first time I called you and kind of gave you the skinny on what this podcast was and wanting to have you on here, is that I really liked the angle you were able to bring to it because of your experience, this legal angle and this angle as an attorney and as a looking at the justice system. And it's so unique because typically what we have in this movement is you have the medical professionals, you have sometimes the lawyers who are arguing for the ideological issues with this, but I really like your, on the ground experience with people in and out and understanding why, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, why all of the stories that we're hearing are leading up to building a case for why there is legitimate concern that everybody should be accepting and be questioning at least. And then on top of that, you're also a father who's had to deal with vaccine injury directly, and I'm a parent, same for me. And that gives you a really unique approach on this issue because it's personal for you, but it's also professional because you're looking at it from that point of view. So that bio that Dr. Bob just read is like, it's so impressive, and it brings something new to the table, totally different from anybody we've interviewed on this show before. And I was always really interested in that. And I think you're very articulate, very well spoken. Every time I've heard you speak, you have passion, you have great content, things to say. You're bringing good points to the table that make sense. It's very logical. And so I thought our listeners would love to hear from you just like we would. So just to give everybody the heads up of why I really wanted you on here, you do offer something very special to this conversation that's very unique, I think. And
well, thank you very much. Well, I'm honored. I'm very humbled by everything you said. Look, I look at evidence for a living, guys. I've made life and death decisions when I was as a former district attorney based off evidence. Things have to make sense to me. My faith, my walk with Christ is a logical analysis. I mean, I'm not a Christian because it's easy. I'm not a Christian because I went to some tent revival or I have a fish on the back of my car. Nothing wrong with having a fish on the back of your car, or because somebody's saying kumbaya to me when I was younger. I mean, I went through the school of hard knocks, as I tell people. I came to Christ in a very painful way. I was arrested for selling drugs when I was a young, stupid idiot. I turned my life around. I gave my life to the Lord. I believe in redemption, not just in my faith, but in the justice system. 2 years later, my brother was murdered in my driveway. I loaded his body on the gurney. I helped wash his blood off my driveway. I heard my mom cry the way only a mom can cry. And so my walk and my drive to want to know answers to this thing called life was very logical. Things have to be logically consistent, and it can't violate the rule of non-contradiction. That's kind of my overlying principles when I analyze anything, whether it's a Christian worldview versus any other worldview, whether it's vaccines, whether it's the law, whether it's evidence, making a life and death decision, trying a case before a jury. And so I look at evidence, and when you look at the evidence, aside from being a daddy of a vaccine injured child, aside from, because I keep my emotions, I've trained to keep my emotions out of things. I'm a passionate guy, there's no doubt about it, but I'm not an emotional guy. There's a difference. I
agree.
Passion and emotion. I'm not big on emotions. I'm huge on passion.
I agree.
And so my walk in this journey, in this world, in the religion of vaccines is a very logical one. It's a very passionate one, but not emotional. And my analysis is one as a prosecutor, defense attorney that is analyzing the evidence, and things just don't add up when you look at things, the evidence or lack thereof objectively.
So we're going to get into kind of the personal story, a little bit of the personal story with your son a little bit later.
Sure.
But let me start by asking you, just going off of what you were just saying. I personally love how you make this comparison of the vaccine debate and the trial process. And you specifically talk about this idea of strong circumstantial evidence. And you talk about in a murder case, you can hear gunshots. Somebody could be running out of a house. You didn't see that person get shot directly, but if a person is murdered, you've heard the shots, somebody's running out, an assailant's running out, you can, with circumstantial evidence, paint the picture and even convict somebody in a court of law that murder happened and that person was responsible for that murder. And again, this is based on circumstantial evidence. And what you have talked about, which I agree 100%, is that in this debate, there is a ton of circumstantial evidence as it relates to vaccine injury, and we have thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of stories that somebody might call anecdotes. But again, when you have enough of those, it sort of becomes data at that point. And
well, I mean, what's the argument that always hear back? Correlation is not causation, right. Which is fine. But correlation in my world means investigation.
Exactly.
So if there's a correlation between a murder and a suspect, you don't say, oh, correlation, not causation, and forget about it. Well, it's probably somebody else. No, it's, hey, that's why you're a suspect, because there's correlation. Right. So there's been a further investigation until we find out who committed the murder. We know someone's dead. So who committed the murder? So, but in this debate, in the religion of vaccines, correlation means ignore.
Yeah,
I mean, it just so they admit there's correlation. I mean, talk about incriminating evidence. We admit there's a correlation. What they mean by correlation is that we understand it's suspicious. It's kind of eerie. I get it. That it seems like there might be a cause. It seems like there might be a connection, but it doesn't mean it's a cause. Okay, well then what's the cause? I don't know, but it's not this. Well, how do you know if you don't have another reason for it?
Working to find out what it is.
No, they don't care. Yeah. I look at motives for living.
I wanted to share that doctors, we are actually literally trained straightforwardly to ignore vaccine injury because of the principle of correlation does not equal causation. So you're right. We're not even told to launch an investigation on this. It's like a convenient way to get us to move on, to not recognize vaccine injury. And it's probably a convenient way to help pediatricians feel comfortable to continue to vaccinate. Because we tell ourselves, oh, all my professors told us I don't even have to think about any causation here, with vaccines causing injury because correlation automatically negates any possibility of causation is how we're actually taught about it. And that really pisses me off that we were misled that way.
But Doc, you guys are inundated with this crap from day one. I mean, all my doctor friends say, we don't know. All we study is the vaccine schedule. We don't do any double-blind placebo studies. We don't look at it, or lack thereof. We don't look at even nutrition. I mean, you guys take like 1 hour of it. And I'm not busting chops on docs. I mean, I respect what you're doing, but when it comes to this issue, I mean, look what happened with opioids. I mean, opioids is the same issue. I mean, it's not like there was some guy on the corner saying, hey, you want to buy some opioids? And then started selling this stuff on the side. These are doctors writing prescriptions. And doctors were duped by big pharma to say, hey, look, it's not that addictive. And we have evidence. I mean, that's why all these, when I was DA in Bexar County, it's Bexar County, by the way, Doc, not Bexar. So if you would have said that in Bexar County, everybody would have known you were an outsider. You just gave your cover. But when I was a DA in Bexar County, we actually filed a lawsuit against Big Pharma for the opioid epidemic here in Bexar County. And other counties in Texas were following suit. And the reason why is because there's an epidemic. So you have a bunch of doctors that signed prescriptions. They wrote prescriptions and they were told by Big Pharma that this is not that addictive. It's the same thing. They lied to doctors about opioids. They lied to doctors about vaccines. And it's not that hard. You talk about a correlation. There's a correlation. The ideology of profits over people, profits over principle. And here we have it. So it's the same idea. So we know that there's an opioid epidemic, but there's not a vaccine epidemic. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Well, I wonder too, as it relates to doctors sort of being sold on this concept, let's say talking about opioids, that again, the safety studies aren't necessarily given. This stuff is like it's always fast tracked. It's always like, here, give it, start writing prescriptions. And it's always waiting until they see a bunch of injuries or a bunch of problems before they go back and go, we should have looked at this a little bit more extensively. You've got doctors that have pharma reps coming into their offices, weekly, if not daily, that are saying, try this, try this, try this here. That nobody's actually doing the research on each of these before they start giving them away. And I think that's another problem, because the same thing crosses over and as it relates to vaccines is they're just straight trusting the AAP and the ACIP to have done that research for them. So they're essentially writing prescriptions for the vaccines. They're essentially giving them away without having done any of this research themselves personally, because they've literally trusted another organization to do it for them. And that's where we come across these problems that we see. It's after the fact. It's always after the fact. Oh, maybe we should have done a little more. Maybe we should have looked a little deeper.
Absolutely.
But just
I agree with
you. Metaphor that you had going about you said the correlation usually in a criminal situation or in a trial situation equals investigation. But in
investigation.
In the vaccine debate, correlation equals case closed.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
To me, there's got to be an answer. As you know, Melissa, when you have a child that's injured and you know that they weren't born that way, and you know that, okay, I look for causal connections. You think about causal connections in a car accident, or someone slips and falls and there's an injury, and did it come from this, or was it a pre-existing injury? We didn't drop our son.
Right.
We weren't in a car accident. He wasn't born that way. We have the pictures and the videos. So if you, medical community or whomever, can't tell me why my son is on the spectrum and we have no history of autism or in our family, then what is the cause? Give me the medical cause. I don't know, but it's for sure not vaccines. Well, I'm going to call bullshit on that. I'm going to call it straight out. That's bullshit. There's no way that would never fly in the court of law. That would never fly for me.
Right.
You can't make an accusation like that, or just ignore the fact, I don't know what happened. It just kind of happened on its own. Things don't just happen on their own, and a child doesn't end up on the spectrum of autism on his own. Now, if he was born that way, then it is what it is, and it's not what it's not. But he wasn't born that way, and I have the actual pictures and videos, like so many hundreds of thousands of families have. Right. We're not by ourselves on Gilligan's Island. We're one of hundreds of thousands of families, and you know this, guys. In the 80s, it was one in, some say 10,000, some say 7,500, whatever it was, but it was one, and it was very rare. And then now it's depending on the study you look at, 1 in 36, 1 in 34. In Jersey, it's even worse. That's not a problem.
Right.
It's an epidemic. Well, then what's the cause? Are you kidding me? Is it the water? Is it the air? Is it the Russians? What the hell's going on? What are we doing?
But they have actually made zero progress in even trying to figure out what is causing autism. They've made zero progress.
They spend all
their
time talking about what's not causing it, which is one thing, and it's vaccines. That definitely doesn't cause it all the time. Never, never, never.
Right.
But nobody knows what is causing it. And you're right. Nobody's really it should be 24 hours a day, teams around the clock. This is an epidemic, way worse than any contagious virus or whatever that's going around.
And meanwhile, vaccine injuries are the only correlation type events that parents are reporting, in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of anecdotal events. That's the only thing that's showing up. So Nico, I love how you're saying, I've never heard anyone say that before.
I told you he'd be good.
When you have thousands of correlations, that should lead to an investigation.
That's exactly right.
Well, absolutely. Look, they're worried about the 16 episodes of measles. Nobody asked for measles. Who gives a crap about measles? I had chickenpox myself, and I'm fine. So you have X amount of incidents of measles, and you have this hundreds of thousands of incidents of autism, and look over here, the distraction, the smoke and mirrors. It's absolutely ridiculous, and they create this environment of fear, and they come in like the saviors and the white horse to fix it with the vaccine. And there's no. Look, here's what I said in one of the interviews for Vaxxed. I think it was for Vax 2, Melissa. I said, every attorney, regardless of what your opinion is, because we can all have our opinions on the issue and the cause of so many children on the spectrum of autism, but every lawyer should have an issue with a system that has no safety studies, a lot of injuries, and no accountability.
Right.
How is any lawyer in this country okay with that? No safety studies, a crap ton of injuries, and no accountability. You can't sue me. Go get the taxpayer money. My money's got to pay for it. So that makes no sense. And you know about the VAERS system, I think the vaccine adverse events reaction
reporting
system, the recording system. I mean, it's insane. The level of, what is it, like 59,000 in 2018? You guys will know the stats better than I would. Yeah. It was 50-something thousand, and then that Harvard study came out and said that only 1% of people report to VAERS. I mean, so you're worried about the cases of measles, but you have 5.9 million adverse effects to vaccines. I mean, they speculate too, because only 1% report. I mean, do the math. I mean, there's no logical consistency to that. That's my point. It's got to make sense.
Well, also this idea of anecdotes, like you're saying, it's so funny that anecdotes don't matter when it's a case of vaccine injury, but anecdotes are okay when it's the person who got measles and was hospitalized for pneumonia. Like, that's an anecdote also, but somehow anecdote's totally fine. And that's one person, like you're saying, or maybe two, that have this quote unquote complication from measles, which maybe is an ear infection and they're hospitalized for it. That's an anecdote. But then you have the anecdote of the child who was injured by a vaccine, and somehow that doesn't matter. That carries no weight, even though it's 10, 100, 1,000 times the number of anecdotes there, that they carry no weight. But the one person whose grandparent had polio, the person who, like these stories you always hear of, like, well, I know somebody that got one of these vaccine preventable diseases and this is what happened. And they use that with weight. That carries weight to them. But the weight of the child who's injured by vaccines does not count, because it's just an anecdote. It's just, it's ironic that you see these things that it's just a double standard across the board. Well,
again, and that goes back to my 2 points at the beginning: logical consistency, and does it violate the law of non-contradiction, Aristotle's law of non-contradiction? And it does. In and of itself, that analysis is contradictory, because it's not applied evenly in both situations, and it's not logically consistent. How can something be in this situation but not be in that situation?
Exactly.
It makes no sense. And again, I shelf the daddy of a vaccine injured child. I mean, look, I am, call it trained, used to not making an emotional decision. I mean, look, I witnessed the execution of my brother's murderer. People thought that when I was DA that I was going to choose for the death penalty more than not, just because of my very personal experience of witnessing the execution of my brother's murder. I chose against it, and I chose for life in prison more than death penalty, not because I don't support the responsible use of the death penalty, but because I looked at the law, I looked at the facts, I looked at the current culture, and the fact that we have true life in prison now versus in the past, in the old law, it wasn't true life in prison. And so I made decisions. I made a very objective, logical, evidence-based decision when I had that choice to either choose death or life in prison. And so I'm trained, if you will, if you can be trained that way, but I'm used to making objective decisions, not emotional decisions. So this is no different with this situation. I can look at evidence, I can look at facts and make a decision. And so, like I said, I really am not emotional when I talk. I'm passionate as hell, but I'm not emotional when I look at evidence, and I'm just going to follow it wherever it leads me. And the thing that irritates me, and I have to temper myself when people get into the name calling game. I mean, because if I walk into court and called you names and brought no evidence, a jury would laugh me out of court, whether I was a prosecutor or a defense attorney, would laugh me out of court. It's like, man, you're a dumbass. Please exit the courtroom. I would have been ridiculed out of court. But yet in this world of debate or litigation, in this vaccine world over our different ideologies, I mean, the people that are militantly, religiously pro-vaccines, they lead with name calling. I mean, literally, oh, you can't be a DA. You can't look at science. You're an idiot. How can you be somehow, because I have an opinion about vaccines, because I'm right about the objective analysis of the lack of evidence, all of a sudden I'm not going to be a good DA. I mean, it's a religion, and it's a religion based off illogical reasoning.
Right. And whenever you see those who are pro-vaccine mandates and who really push for mandatory vaccines, you're absolutely right. They never scientifically refute any points we bring up,
Nothing.
or any of
Nothing.
our scientifically proven points that show why mandates are wrong and mandates are bad for society and mandates won't even work and they're unnecessary. They never argue with us on a scientific level. All they do is the personal attacks. All they do is name call, because that's all they have. But they know in the public domain that often works, especially it works on social media and it works in popular media.
And it is easy.
Right.
You're right.
It's easy. Yeah.
Well, there's a saying in trial work when you're a trial attorney. When you have the law on your side, you argue the law. When you have the facts on your side, you argue the facts. When you have neither, you attack the opposing counsel.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because you got nothing else. So you make personal attacks. And that's exactly, they don't have the law on their side. Well, they have the law for now, but they don't have a logical reasoning on their side. They definitely don't have the facts. They don't have the study. They don't have the facts. And so they have to just name call. And that, to me, that's childish. And it would not hold up in a court of law. So why should it hold up in the court of public opinion? But it does.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting. I was reading an article or an interview you had done recently, and there was something that kind of caught my attention that you had said. You had, and without going into, like necessarily what happened to your brother or much into that, but you had talked about this idea of machismo and this idea of like, in your household growing up, you had never really said, I love you to your brother. You guys didn't hug. That wasn't part of the culture because men were sort of taught to be different. And I thought about that. And, we've had a lot of conversations about the lack of men in this movement, the lack of fathers standing up and standing beside their women and for their children in this movement, which is a movement of mothers. I mean, there is just no question that the medical freedom movement, the informed consent movement, is a movement of 90 to 95% women. We see this everywhere that we go. And I was thinking about what you were saying about how, growing up that way. And I think that this movement has a lot to do with compassion and empathy. You have to be open-hearted to really take in this idea of vaccine injury and to have compassion and empathy for these families. And I'm wondering if the way that society raises men to sort of not be, tuned into that open-heartedness and the ability to have that connection with people, if that is affecting men really being able to get involved in this movement and be on the streets with us and be totally involved in this fight, and kind of what your thoughts might be on that.
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you, because I don't think much of men these days, and I don't see that painted with a broad brush, but men have been castrated in society. I mean, you talk about, this whole toxic masculinity, men have been just beaten down into shutting up. So I don't know if that's it. I think it's ignorance. I think it's a lack of courage. Courage is not a word used for men anymore. I think men have been beaten down by different movements, and it's like, man, I better just shut up. If I better not say anything, I can't give an opinion because I'm going to be called a name. I'm going to be labeled this. I'm going to be called sexist. I'm going to be said this. And men need to know what it means to be a man. For me, a biblically minded man is a man that reveres his wife, protects her, serves her, sacrifices for her, gives his life for her. Like in Ephesians 5 and 1 Peter 3, in Proverbs 31:10 talks very specifically about how women are held up and should be honored and revered. And so that's my definition. So I'm a Christian feminist, right? I'm not the current feminist movement, but a Christian feminist, which is a beautiful movement. Women are revered. And so I don't know what the answer is to that. I noticed it myself that there are very few men with strong advocacy in this. And I don't know if it's guilt, because I dealt with guilt. That we're called to protect me as a type A alpha male. It's my job to protect my children, and I failed my son. I dealt with that for years, this guilt. You know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So obviously it wasn't intentional, but I dealt with that. I had to pray about it and ask, and forgive myself. And I remember even talking to Michael and saying, Michael, forgive me. He's trapped in a prison. I see it in his eyes. And it's tough, So my older brother, Mike, whom, at the moment he needed me the most on August 15th, 1996 at 2:14 in the morning, I wasn't there for him. I didn't know he was outside and he could protect himself, but it was, he didn't have a weapon with him at the time. And so it was this guilt for me. Now I use that guilt to make me, just this will not be in vain. There's no way I'm going to tell my son's story.
Right.
And I'm honored when other people say, Nico, thank you and your wife for being courageous enough to at least make me think and pause. And either we spread out the vaccines or we did this, because if our son or daughter would be injured, we wouldn't have been able to deal with it. And you know what? Praise God for that. And I will not let Michael's challenges be in vain. I won't. And so I think the lack of men in here, I don't know if it's because they don't spend as much time with the children. There's no doubt that God has ordained women in such a beautiful way, which you guys do to bless us with our children and the way you serve the children and just endless, night after night. Davi, my wife, is a super mom. I mean, she's up in her patience and her perseverance and drive and determination. And mine is in a different way. And that's why together, I hope and pray we make a great team. But she does things that I'm just not capable of doing and vice versa. So I don't know what the answer is to that one, Melissa. I just know that I owe it to my son, and I owe it to in my faith, it's to speak the truth always, and the truth sets you free, John 8:31. And so I believe that Hosea 4:6 is a passage that I really preach to people. My people perish for lack of knowledge. Ignorance is not bliss. It's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And what you don't know can hurt you, as they say in the old days. And so my job is to inform people. I've never told anyone not to vaccinate. I won't. I encourage them to educate themselves. I refuse to receive the label and the name calling of an anti-vaxxer. I'm a pro-truther. Mm-hmm. I'm pro-truth. If you show me the truth, give me the evidence, I'll go back to vaccinating my kids from head to toes. And in the crevices too, everywhere. If you show me it's okay with them, It's not. You can't do that. You can't tell me that the mixture, the concoction of thimerosal, lead, aluminum, and all the other things that go into that cocktail are safe in any human body, especially an infant.
And you mentioned in Vax too, something that I liked, and that will have to get bleeped. Just be prepared, Dr. Bob. Get ready to write down this thing, that you wanted to be the voice for the son. Again, we're going to go into that in just a little bit, but that you wanted to be the voice for your son since he no longer had one. And you specifically said you refused to be too chicken to stay silent.
That's right.
And so that this is in accordance with what you were just saying. This idea that our children need us to be outspoken, and so do the fathers need to be, obviously.
That's right.
Just like the mothers, because you're right. The mothers have a connection to these children because they've witnessed this day in, day out. They're with them 24 hours a day.
Think about this. I mean, as you guys know, in families that have a child on the spectrum of autism, there's like an 85% divorce rate. Mm-hmm. So the lack of men involvement, I have not looked at the stats. I mean, is it because the families have split? Is it because daddy's doing this and mommy's over here and mom's in the fight, dad's giving up and, he's checked out? I don't know. Look, I deal with a social experiment called the justice system, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a social experiment. I know what I can say, and I have no empirical data on this. It's just my observation. It seems to me that men want to be cool and they want to be accepted. And I think they see that this fight is brutal. And mommies just don't give two shits. I mean, your mama bear, she'll shank you looking at your kid wrong. Mm-hmm. And I got that daddy bear deal, like that lion, protector type mentality. But I'm telling you, I think like a lot of men don't understand it. They're not in it. I think there's a lot of fatigue. It takes a lot. It's emotionally draining. It's mentally draining, because there's more moms that I would take into a courtroom to testify as an expert, and I could probably qualify them as an expert, than most people with all the letters you want behind their name. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are some intelligent women out there that could, out debate you and have litigate with you on facts and science and lack thereof and all this other things. And so I don't know. I think men, they want to be more accepted. Moms just like, it's my kid. Now, not all men. And again, I'm not one of those guys, obviously. The good doctor is not one of those guys, obviously, right? I mean, you're a doctor and you're putting yourself in the lion's den. I commend you for that. But I think it's a combination of things. And I would be interested to the listeners that you have and the women. I mean, have they been divorced, not divorced, on the verge of it? Is it causing strain? And I encourage the men, just listen, pause for a little while. It's got to be organic. It cannot be fake or prompted. I mean, it's got to come. It's got to come from you. And there's a lot of disappointment in men because they have these ideas of what their child is supposed to be like. And that I was no different. My first son named after my brother who was murdered. Are you kidding me? You talk about a kick in the crotch. I mean, that was something that I had to battle in my mind. And And it was a tough road for me, but I went straight to the Word of God. And I prayed about it a lot, and it was not easy. And that's why I have more resolve than ever. There's nobody going to back me off of this. You better bring a ton of evidence. And then I will always correct myself to truth. And I'm not talking about relative truth. I'm not talking about my truth versus truth. Doesn't care about your feelings. Truth is real. It's universal, and it's exclusive by definition. And so I will always submit myself to truth, objective truth, not subjective truth. And so that's where I'm at. So this fight needs to be had. And it just seems like more people are waking up to it, because once you know, Melissa and Doc, you can't unknow it.
No.
You just can't. I mean, if you really open your heart, your mind, and your logic, you can't unknow this information. And questions have to be asked. Our our lawmakers have to be held accountable. I mean, there's some idiots here in Texas that say, nobody comes in my office if you're not vaccinated. That's, what do you care if your vaccines work? What do you give a crap if I'm not vaccinated? I haven't been vaccinated I'm 47 years old. Gosh, I don't even know, 35 years I was younger. I got 7 of them, whatever it was on my schedule back then, or 5 or whatever it was. But I've never had a flu shot.
Well, and like I say to Dr. Bob and everybody else, what does it mean to be vaccinated? So to that legislator in Texas, or we heard of one in Washington as well, that was a congressional legislator. What does that mean to be vaccinated? Like, which ones, how many doses? Like, nobody qualifies that. They make it like very black or white, but does it just mean for measles? Because is that the thing everybody's worried about? Does it mean for measles and pertussis and the flu? Like, what does it mean? I'm sure most people wouldn't say, if you haven't had your 3rd dose of hepatitis B, you can't come in my office. So, it's like, it's this understanding of what it means to be vaccinated, and nobody qualifies that. Never. It's just get your kids.
It's a bunch of sound bites.
It's like you either do or you don't. But as everybody knows, it's a sliding scale. It's not one of those things you either do or you don't.
And this guy at a town hall meeting, he said, Mr. DA, don't you think you're irresponsible for not vaccinating your child? I go, well, let's test your theory. Do you vaccinate your children? He goes, of course I do. I go, what are in those vaccines? Have you ever looked at the insert? He's like, I frankly, I know that it's got a little bit of the whatever you're trying to vaccinate. I mean, it's some stupid ass response. And I said, who's the irresponsible one now? You don't know what they're injecting in your child, and I'm the irresponsible one? I'm just asking for evidence. You're just blindly walking into the gas chamber, and I'm the irresponsible one. Your definitions are a little skewed, sir, so I'm going to respectfully disagree.
Well, also,
you might want to rethink that.
To call you an anti-vaxxer if a child's vaccine injured, it's like, by definition, that child is vaccinated.
Well, they don't acknowledge that, though. See, but here's what I tell them. I say, I did it your way. Don't forget that.
Right,
I have 2 kids that were vaccinated.
Played the game,
My first child, our first child, Maya, she broke out in hives. We didn't know. They actually told my wife, look how stupid this is. They told my wife that she was allergic to her breast milk.
I think I remember saying that,
And I tried to give the doctor a way out. I said, Doc, you mean what's in her breast milk, right? And he goes, no, her breast milk. I said, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I said like that. Obviously, we parted ways. But, it was even before I had researched this stuff. Michael wasn't even born, so it wasn't like I was so passionate. I was just using some common sense. I said, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. We were terrified as first-time parents. We didn't know. And we just said, vaccinate whatever you want. We thought they were well. So Maya is vaccinated up until 3 years old. Michael until he's 16 months. And then 0 since then. And then our last 2 kids have 0 vaccines, and I'm 0, like not 1. And so we become this unintended experiment.
Totally.
We're truly a vaxxed versus unvaxxed experiment. The same genetics,
right? Same
family. And then very different results. Our last 2 kids have never had an ear infection, not one. When they get sick and they're building up their immune system, literally within 72 hours at the most, they're better. Other kids are 10 days on some antibiotic or some whatever's going on out there. With some natural stuff and essential oils and silver and some holistic things, fruit and good healthy eating. and they're better. Praise God. And the immune system works, actually. Can you imagine that?
I see the same thing in my office over and over again. Families with 3 or 4 kids raised in this sort of the two different ways that you're describing, and unfortunately after an injury, and they're the next 1 or 2 or 3 kids they have that they raised vaccine free. My general impression is that they seem way healthier, and the illnesses are shorter and milder. And it's it's a very interesting observation that I see every day.
Yeah, the same case study in my house. I mean, I have the same thing. My son is named Justice, by the way, which I thought you'd like, because I know you talk about justice quite a bit, considering your background. But he's vaccine free after what happened to my daughter. So yeah, you really do see in your own house, you can really see these differences very up close, and you know that everything else is the same, food's the same, genetics are the same, breastfeeding is the same. It's like, what is the difference? There's only one difference there, and then it's a story you hear over and over and over again.
Melissa, where is your daughter on the spectrum?
So she's not. So my daughter didn't have neurodevelopmental disorders, but she had a whole series of different reactions, including seizures, neurological, intestinal damage. Her stuff was kind of, like I say, it was instant in some cases, and some was cumulative. But she basically had 19 doses over her first year and had a whole series of different reactions. It took me a long time until after her 12-month appointment until I realized what was going on. And we had even done only 2 at a time, no more than 2 at a time. And it was still too much for her at her very first appointment. But I since found out that I was hospitalized for a febrile seizure after a vaccine as a child. And I was put on anti-seizure meds until I was 5, which was kind of common practice at that point. But it's interesting when you are faced with this with your own children, how you start to look at your family medical history and you find out things I was never asked, of course, by the pediatrician before we vaccinated my daughter. They never asked me a single time what my family medical history was. There a history of seizures? Has that happened before? Nobody even asked that question. I didn't even know I was supposed to look in that direction before making decisions and maybe delaying or holding off or doing something slightly differently. But yeah, mine was a whole series, for her, it was a whole series of different things over that first year. And it forced me into this entire debate, which of course I knew nothing about at the time, which was what I was going to ask you, is this idea that you were sort of brought into this because of your son's story. And then you all of a sudden were aware that there was a community of parents fighting for vaccine safety and acknowledgement of their injured kids. Were you shocked to know that there were this many people in the same position that you were in? Were you and your wife?
I was. I mean, look, I knew nothing about autism except until I watched Rain Man. Nobody did. I mean, Rain Man, as we know, he was an autistic savant, very rare, but I mean, it's an amazing phenomenon there and mentally, but I didn't know anything about Rain Man. I mean, I didn't know anything about autism. I didn't know what it was. We didn't have any autistic kids. We had a kid with Down syndrome with us when I was growing up, but there was no autism. There wasn't 1 in 30 something or 1 in 40. I mean, just nobody had EpiPens, and there weren't. You were just normal kids. I mean, nobody was on any type of, medication. It was just, you had some sinuses, allergies, and whatever. It was just different back then. I mean, like I said, I'm 47 years old. It was a different world. I knew nothing about autism. I have an aunt who my grandma had in her late 40s, who's mentally challenged. She does not have Down syndrome, but she's MR. She has an IQ substantially under 70. But that's not autism. You understand my point? That's not autism. She was born that way, by the way. I mean, Michael wasn't born that way.
Right.
And so I was shocked. It was surprising to see, and it hurt me for the families that didn't maybe have a voice that I might have had. When I came out, when I was the elected DA and said vaccines can and do cause autism, I mean, it went bananas worldwide. And I knew it was going to do that. I knew that was going to happen. And I was honored that I had the platform to do it. And I prayed about it. It was not an easy decision. It wasn't a decision that, hey, no, screw it, no matter what. I mean, I was given the responsibility of serving this community as the district attorney. But I can't divorce myself from being a DA. It's no different than at the time Governor Perry of Texas was advocating for the Gardasil vaccine as the governor. And we know he had ties to that industry with a friend of his or whatever. I mean, I wouldn't shake his hand if he gave it to me for other reasons. But and then President Obama was advocating for vaccines. So if President Obama as the president can advocate for vaccines, Governor Perry, as the governor, can advocate for vaccines, but Nico LaHood, as the DA, can't say, in my opinion, I call bullshit on that again, too. I mean, that makes no sense to me. You don't have a rule that applies to you or to me, but not to you. That's hypocrisy by definition, if you look it up. And so I will not sit back to hypocrisy. There's got to be an even playing field. I mean, Lady Justice in my world wears a blindfold. She doesn't pick it up every once in a while to see who she's dealing with. The blindfold stays on all the time. And she looks at the law and the facts and she puts them together. I'm going to look at the studies and the facts and empirical data, and I'm going to put it all together. It's no different to me. That's why this analysis is very easy.
Well, Nico, you're surrounded by other legal professionals, smart people who make decisions based on empirical data and empirical evidence. And, you talk to judges, and I mean, your profession is probably filled with some of the smartest people in our country and people that make decisions based on evidence. So I'm curious, what do you hear from your colleagues when you tell them your son's story and tell them how you analyzed the evidence and saw the clear correlation and the timing of his developmental regression in relation to vaccination? And do they stop and think? Do you reach them on that level, or do they just, for the most part, just shut you down, saying it's impossible?
Well, the people that I have a relationship with will listen. And I can't tell many times, like, well, they want to repeat a soundbite. They want to say some rhetoric that they've heard. I mean, look, lawyers, there's good and bad lawyers out there, and you give lawyers too much credit. I mean, I wasn't a good defense attorney for my son. I mean, look, think about this. I question experts for a living. That's what I do. If you say, I have an expert that says this about your client, I say, well, your expert sucks. And I have 2 experts. And they say, oh, yeah, well, I have 3 experts. And then I say, let me show you how your 3 experts suck. And I have 4 experts. And we do this back and forth, right? That's what we do in a court of law. Yeah. I'm used to dealing with evidence. I'm used to dealing with science. I'm used to dealing with doctors. I'm used to dealing with cross-examining. I educate myself and I get an expert to educate me on the subject matter. And then I go to town. But when it came to my son, it was like just marching to the drum, Pavlov's dog, ding, 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 saliva, go. And they said, I didn't ask a question. I didn't even think to ask a question. Matter of fact, if you on the high wire with Dale Bigtree, when I did that interview in the studio, my friend George that I talk about, who is a high level scientist for Merck, he has 4 kids. None of them are vaccinated. He was in clinical development. I mean, he was on the bench, as they say, doing the experiments. The guy's brilliant. And he didn't overlook vaccine distribution, but he was working on other drugs, and he was a supervisor over vaccines, but not directly. And he has 4 kids, wife's an RN. None of them are vaccinated. Not one of them. The guy works for Merck, or used to at the time, in the laboratory, right. And he didn't vaccinate. I mean, hello. I mean, if you're a chef and you don't eat your own food, then you're a fraud. I mean, yeah. So I love that. I mean, this is the example. And he tried to warn me, guys, and lovingly. Really? Now, he's the guy that we do a lot of biblical teachings together, and he tried to warn me lovingly because he knows how sensitive this topic is. And I said, George, come on, man. I mean, doctors, what are they going to lie about? I mean, we are so conditioned. Yep. We are so, it's almost like saying, oh, the most important meal of the day is what?
Breakfast.
Oh, no, it's not. What evidence is there? It's not the most important meal of the day. Matter of fact, we know that intermittent fasting is tremendously good for your body. And so now everybody's advocating to skip breakfast, which pisses off the milk and the dairy and the egg industry. But but look at that. We all repeat that.
It depends on how hungry I am, Nico. Come on. I mean, maybe I ate it I skipped dinner the night Fair before. Enough. I mean, it's like, it all depends on the situation.
I love it.
That's right. But that's interesting, Nico. So, I mean, you're raising your first child, you're vaccinated, and you're raising your second child, and he is healthy and thriving. He's talking. He's developing, meeting all his milestones, and you also have do you have your friend from Merck yet at this point before your child's injury?
And we do.
And
he's
talking to you about it. And like you said, you're saying, no, doctors can't be wrong. Doctors, have to know what they're doing. You had this blind trust in the experts, essentially, that you felt like you had these experts looking out for the best interests of your children. And now I know, that you have to be that expert looking out for your best interests. But I'm curious, what happened with your child? He was around 16, 18 months. He got the round of vaccines at that time. Tell us exactly what happened and over what kind of time frame did you see his developmental problems begin?
Sure. Well, he was vaccinated on day one. We didn't know. And by the end of that first day, he was in the NICU for a week.
Oh.
I mean, for what? Who the hell knows? They just say, kiss your baby goodbye, he's going to the NICU. What the hell for? Mm-hmm. And so we spent 10 days in the NICU with the baby as they're filling him with antibiotics and giving him stuff. It's almost like, well, what the hell? We got to do something. I mean, I really, this crapshoot approach to certain aspects of the medical profession is frustrating for me. Yeah. I don't just, right. I mean, well, I don't know what it is. Here's take a Z-Pack. Well, what do you mean? Well, why would I do that?
Right.
Let's try this. Oh, that was the wrong antibiotic. Why'd you give it to me in the first place then? I don't understand.
Or you have the flu as an antibiotic. You're like, the flu virus. Yeah. Like, why are you giving me an antibiotic? Yeah. It's so odd.
Exactly. Or Tamiflu. What are the effects of that? So there was all this medicine getting pumped into him. So within a relatively short period of time, he develops pyloric stenosis. So he's got this tremendous projectile, which a lot of kids do because they're already seeing that injury in the lining of their gut.
Exactly.
And so he was going to need surgery. He didn't need surgery. Of course, we're vaccinating him every time they go into. We're following the schedule. We didn't know. Mm-hmm. No one even said like, hey, you know what? We might want to look at this. Nobody says that. Zero. And I didn't know to look at the inserts. I didn't know to ask for anything. I'm still on this train of just believe. Mm-hmm. And he was making eye contact and the goo goo gagas, and he's about to talk and he's smiling for pictures and acknowledging people that walk in a room. And then around like I said, the 16 months, to be fair, maybe the 18-month mark. And when you don't realize there's going to be a tragedy, you're not paying attention.
Right.
It's not like, hey, by the way, at 2:00 tomorrow, there's going to be, so pay attention so I want to hear all the details later. Okay, I'll be paying attention, right? And so you don't know because it wasn't even that obvious at the time. Of course, my wife comes home from the doctors. I wasn't there during that round. And then I would say, again, I didn't even know when that round happened. Oh, we're going to take Michael for his checkup. Okay, whatever that means. I love you. Call me after. Let me know what the doc says. Oh, things are great. He's growing. Okay. Oh, by the way, they jammed a couple of needles in him with how many rounds in each needle, just kind of mixed all together synergistically. I understand. But it was in weeks. Within weeks, he started developing tics and losing eye contact, of course, and not responding to his name. The smiles went away. What do they always do? Check his hearing. Well, his hearing was fine. Okay, we'll check his hearing. I don't know why, but we got to do something. He's not responding to his name. His hearing was fine. And we just kind of went along this road, and little by little, Dobby started doing some investigation. We started talking to my buddy George even more, his wife, because her brother is on the spectrum of autism, but very severe. And her mom swears it was after vaccines, but back then he's my age, he's 40 something, late 40s, and he's pretty severe. Well, no one would even look at you to think that was the issue with these inoculations. And when people talk about immunization, vaccines are not immunizations. I mean, they're vaccines. I mean, I'm immune to the chickenpox because I got the chickenpox. It went through my lymph nodes, into my gut system, and I'm immune to the chickenpox now. I wasn't vaccinated to get rid of the chickenpox. Right. And so, I mean, terms matter. Words mean something to me. And so it was relatively quick, guys, and we knew it. It was close enough to that big round for us to make some connection. And it was really Davi. She's the superstar in all this, as you can imagine. And then for me, for my personality, the guilt set in, and then I just got pissed. I mean, I can get myself worked up into a pretty good frenzy, and that's why I really temper myself with my faith, because I don't want to get emotional. Because it's emotional. I mean, look, I've missed out on 9 years of I've never had a conversation with my son. Mm-hmm. I don't know what his thoughts are. We do that. I mean, if something doesn't change, I'm not going to have grandkids with my son. Mm-hmm. And that should matter. People's stories matter. When you get cheated out of a life, and I already got cheated out of one life, and there's no way in hell I'm going to shut up. You're not going to. You might as well. And you better bring your choice of weapons. We're going to fight. I'm not backing down.
One life too, because it's the siblings, it's the parents, it's the extended family, friends. I mean, the type of domino effect that something like this has, and then the discussion that people have had about what happens in the next 20 years with these children, who's going to be caring for them, and what's going to happen when a generation of children are not able to like independently live in society, and who's going to shoulder that burden, and then everybody's going to want to figure out we have a problem. And you know, it's like you've got thousands and tens of thousands of parents saying that we've got a serious issue here, and instead of looking into it and solving it, and instead of trying to solve it, they literally just want to deflect from a connection we know is happening, because they're I'm sure assuming there's going to be a huge panic if the information comes out. And I understand that fear, you know, I understand that the entire system comes down from what it was. I get that. But I truly feel parents have a right to know. I don't care how damaging that information is. Parents have a right to know. You cannot keep that information from parents because you're afraid they will find out. Like that is just unethical. And I think that's really the bigger thing we're dealing with, is it's like the lie is covering up the lie is covering up the lie. And it's just so big now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I study MO, like modo operandi. So we know what pharma did with Vioxx, right? They knew they were killing people. They knew it, but they figured, by the time it's all said and done, they figured out we'll write a big check and we'll have a net gain. I mean, it's borderline evil. I mean, well, I'm going to say it's evil. Screw it, not borderline shit. It's evil. It's evil, and that they should be held accountable. I mean, they will be held accountable eternally. And I say that boldly, without hesitation. They will be. You cannot play with people's lives and alter destinies of families and not think you're going to pay at some point. You're not going to get away with it. And I find peace in my faith. I find peace in that. But until I'm called off this battlefield of life, I'm going to keep fighting for truth. You have to, for our children and our children's children and other people's kids too. It's not just about my kids.
Right. And speaking of ethics, you had said, get ready for the beeper again, Dr. Butler, you had said you make a politician.
I do.
You said, because in politics is not conducive for good people, which I agree 100%. Right. I agree that I feel like people get into politics with the intention of really trying to help people. And they really think they're going to make a difference. And I think the game, the process, the industry of it all basically corrupts people over time. And the longer you're in it, the worse that it gets. Tell me more about kind of what you mean by this idea of like being a good person, being morally backed, and really feeling like you're authentic and doing what you believe is right and following truth, and how hard that is to be in alignment with what politics are today, which is really dangerous, because we're talking about people making laws and now taking away rights of people, and they're doing it not based on what's right and true, but what is funding them or what is behind them.
Yeah, politics has become a profession versus being a passion. Mm-hmm. That's where we've lost it. I believe I was a very good public servant. I was a very good statesman. But when I said I was a politician, is because a politician, by today's standards, will tell you what you want to hear, will tell them what they want to hear, is personally driven. It's not about yourself. Mm-hmm. I mean, the way this was set up is people go serve and they come back to their farm and they go back to life, and they go they bring a practical approach to something and then hand it off to somebody who is equally yoked in mindset, and they had a meaning of the minds, because we all had a culture was the same. Culture meaning the way you do things in life. But the word of politics in the Greek just means to advocate. To advocate for what some define as the affairs of the city. So what are you advocating for the affairs of the city? So that the worst advice we got growing up, and Melissa, you sound much younger than me and the good doctor here.
I'm not.
But
I'm not though. I'm only a couple years younger than you, Nico. I'm telling you.
Well, you sound like you're in your 20s.
No, I know.
You sound like you're in your 20s.
No, I'm 42 this year, so I'm right.
God bless you.
Yeah, I'm right behind you.
And Doc's 43 and I'm 47, so we're good.
Yes, I am.
But politics just means advocacy. And so the worst advice we got was, what are the two things you don't talk about in public circles? Is what?
Politics, religion. Mm-hmm.
That's it. Horrible advice. The worst advice you could ever get. I would never give my kids that advice. So religion to me just is, what's your worldview? Are you atheist? That's a worldview. That's your religion. Are you agnostic? Are you Hindu, Buddhist, Shintoist, Taoist, Christian? What denomination? Islamic? So what is your worldview? What is your quote unquote religion? What is your ideology? And then what are you advocating for? What are your politics? How can I live as a peaceful neighbor to you, even if we disagree passionately?
Right.
How can I live if I don't know what you're advocating for and what your worldview is? So we need to have these discussions, and you can't worry about being comfortable, and you can't.
Discussions, yep.
Right.
Well, I mean, they're really not. But it's easy, but not to. Right. I mean, but you need to work things out. You have to risk offending each other, not trying to, but risk it to have meaningful conversation. How do I tell you that I don't like? Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, we have to tolerate, not condone behavior, certain behavior, but tolerate it. We definitely do. And so politics to me has turned into such a bad word. And I love the idea of politics. What are you advocating for? And what are the affairs of your city? And meaning your environment and how you do things. And so politics should be discussed. Platforms are different. So the political platform is the donkey or the elephant, right? And so that's the platform, and it will change. I mean, Democrats and Republicans have changed, and they're going to continue to change. And who knows? The Democrat Party's gone off the deep end, but I mean, things are going to change as things move on, but your principles won't. That's why I stick to my principles and ideology, my worldview, Judeo-Christian principles that have to be logically consistent. They can't contradict each other, and I have to be able to give an answer for why I believe what I believe, and I can. And so that's not done enough. So the reason why I was not good at politics is because I refuse to tell people what they want to hear. That's not, there's no honor in that to me. You're a salesman selling snake oil, and I won't do it. I think that you're a fraud, and that's not what you let your yes be a yes, let your no be a no, be courageous, be passionate about it, but also be
principled,
be courteous also. I mean, be gracious, but be principled, and then explain, be transparent. I was always transparent. You can ask me why, and I'll give you the answer. But it's the same mindset. I'm defending a position, so there's an accusation. The accusation is that we're nuts. The accusation is that we're anti this. The accusation is that we're just a bunch of emotional whatevers. And so I'm defending my son. I'm defending a position, and I'm pushing back. I'm not just playing defense. I mean, I'm going to be offensive as well. A good defense is a very strong offense. And so I refuse to take on the piñata, as we say in San Antonio, mentality, where someone just takes swipes at you. I'm not a punching bag. If you're gonna step in the ring with me, you better have your headgear on. And so we're gonna litigate. We're gonna spar. We're gonna go back to back, toe to toe, so to speak, with evidence and advocacy. And I'm not gonna back down. I won't. I will humble myself to truth every day of the week. First, I submit myself to the Lord. I submit myself to my wife lovingly, and my children. And I'll also submit myself to truth, but I will not submit myself to a fight because I'm afraid. I'm not. And so it's that mentality that I take into the battle, and that it's just part of my DNA. It's just the way God wired me. It was developed over time because I feel like I've been fighting my whole life, whether, justice for my brother who was murdered, or me overcoming a poor choice and trying to fight to get away from labels as a drug dealer or a criminal or whatever it was when I was young and stupid. Or in politics, you get called every name in the book by cowards in their underwear behind a keyboard. And so, I mean, it's the same people that work for the trolls on the pharmaceutical side. But I mean, so what do you do? I mean, so you stand forward and you present your case. I'm not going to scream someone into loving Jesus or supporting the position of the truth behind vaccines. I'm going to logically present the case like I do a jury, passionately, but with evidence. I want credibility. And so you gain credibility if you're educating and you can bring the supporting evidence to support your position. And that's what I do. Again, I make no emotional pleas. I'm nothing against crying or getting emotional, but nobody wants to see that. I want to bring logic to the discussion. And if they're going to say no to me or they're going to call me crazy, they're going to be calling crazy the logic and the evidence that I'm bringing to the table and the lack of answers that they have. I promise you, when you push back, I mean, it turns into, oh gosh, they didn't give me that many sound bites. I've already called you 4 names. I don't have any more names to call you. Okay, well, we're not hearing the name calling. It's not nanny, boo-boo. It's give me the evidence because the jury's got to make a decision. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, Nico, what are some of your current passions that you do, outside the office? I know you're heavily involved with your church and your community. You do a lot of podcasting. Tell what's sort of your biggest passion or your outlet for your Christian views and your views about vaccines? Is it mostly through podcasting now?
It is. I do teach. I teach a lot. I do prison ministry. I teach quarterly with my buddy George, the one that worked for Merck, and we teach apologetics, it comes from the Greek word apologia, to give an answer. And when you look at the Greek word, it's to give a defense, to give a defense for your position. So we teach apologetics of the Christian worldview. Again, I'm not a kumbaya Christian. I mean, I have a podcast called R-Rated Christianity that gives you a little heads up of the way. And I do men's Bible studies.
So that sounds interesting. Write it down, guys. We'll probably put it in the bio description of this episode to let people get to you as well.
Yeah, there's no bleeping on that one. And so we just talk, and I never use the Lord's name in vain, but we're going to be authentic. I think people are starving for authenticity in politics and in the church. And again, I present the case for a biblical worldview. And so it just makes sense to me. I've studied the Bible. I don't encourage people to read the Bible because anybody can read it, but study it. And you have to understand what something they call hermeneutics, meaning translations of Hebrew in the Old Testament, Greek, linguistics, cultures, history. I mean, so you have to look at all these things when you're looking at this ancient book from antiquities and garnering the wisdom that God put in that book. It's a fascinating book from an objective standpoint. Again, I'm not this feel-good kumbaya tent revival Christian. I'm a raw, rough, R-rated Christian that has been in the battlefield, and my faith has been very much tested. And I came out on the other side. So that's my passion. Health is my passion. I eat very healthy. I work out. I used to compete in martial arts. I don't do that anymore. But I still try to stay healthy for my family and my kids. And it's an outlet for me to burn off some steam. And then it's just kids. Now that I'm not in politics anymore for now, I've just enjoyed my weekends back with my kids. So if I'm not doing some type of ministry or podcasting to try to encourage people to think, that's really what I want to do. I want to encourage people to think. We don't critically think anymore. We don't teach our kids to do that. If it's on Facebook, it's got to be true. Or if it's a soundbite, it sounds cute, and then they just repeat it 100 times, and so it's got to be true. And so I just want to encourage people to think and reason together, and so that's what I try to advocate.
Well, and to clarify for everyone, the R-rated in your podcast actually stands for what?
Real, raw, and redemptive.
All right.
Yes,
I mean, so we have real conversations. They're very raw, and hopefully leading to a position of a place of redemption. And that's the Christian message, right? God takes all your crap and He makes a beautiful masterpiece out of it if you hand it over. And so the redemptive aspect of the Christian worldview is beautiful, and it's scandalous. It was scandalous in Jesus' time. It's scandalous today.
Have you been well received by your Christian brethren in the church community regarding the issues of vaccine injury? Do you find they listen more to you, or do you find they listen less? Are they more or less open to hearing these kinds of truths regarding vaccines?
Well, anyone that follows me, and I say this humbly, I'm not being arrogant when I say this, knows that I don't just say things out of my ass. I mean, I'm going to back it up. Mm-hmm. And so when you gain credibility, and that's why it's so important not to let your emotions take over and just say something to say it. I always try to double check. I'm human like anybody else, but I never present something in court that I can't back up. A jury will hold you accountable later. So that's my mentality. I always know that I can be held accountable, and I never want someone to correct me. That's not an arrogant statement. It's a credibility statement. Mm-hmm. And so I always want to be credible. And with a jury, if you gain that credibility, then on close calls, they're gonna side with you. And I just want to make sure that I'm always representing the truth well. And even if the truth is not something that's on my side, it doesn't matter. The truth doesn't care about my feelings either. Mm-hmm. Truth is truth. And so it is well received. I marvel, not in a good way, almost embarrassing when people, I read an article where someone said that you cannot, they made some case that if you're a Christian, you should be vaccinating your kids. And I just said, what,
yes.
what Bible is this guy reading? And what is just, it was just absolute insanity. as if God ordained vaccines, like God ordained chemo and radiation or some crap. I mean, that's not that God can't use man-made things. Of course he does. But what are you talking about?
Right.
I mean, there's no way that you can support a biblical principle saying, yes, walk your kids into this insane asylum and just inject them with all this crap with no evidence that they're safe. Yes, that's a biblical principle. I don't know which one it is, because Hosea 4:6 says, my people perish for lack of knowledge. And we are truth seekers. One of God's characteristics, not just love, but it's truth. He cannot lie. He hates deception, Proverbs 6:16. And so, I mean, we're dealing with an industry of deception. So how does God ordain deception? He never will. It's against his character. That's why he hates lying. And so, yeah, false witness, all this stuff. And so I laugh at that, and I love to engage discussions like that, because people will follow that lead thinking, because they don't want to think, so they want someone to think for them. And so if you get a pastor or some biblical leader that tells you to do something, well, hell, I'll do it, and that's not biblical.
Yeah, well, I just want to say, it's so great chatting with you. I knew I would enjoy you being on here for all the different things that you bring to the table on this conversation, your personal story, your professional background, your religious perspective. There's a lot going here that makes you a really interesting person to talk to on this issue. And I've really enjoyed the things I've seen of you in the past. Always blown away by how articulate you were as a speaker, and just you were captivating. You can tell you have the charisma, you have the passion. You're somebody, if our listeners don't already know about you, they should know about you. And hopefully they can follow your podcast if they're interested, or get involved with what other types of community outreach and things that you're doing. We are going to be coming to San Antonio, by the way.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, so the end of March. So maybe we can see you guys.
We'll break some bread together. I'd love to. I don't know how long are you guys in town?
We'll just be there for we're going to be there for probably 2.5 days, essentially, Dallas and San Antonio.
Right.
And we're going to be doing 2 different events the end of March. So I hope we'll be able to meet in person and share a hug. As I say, we're all on the same journey together. And it's like we're literally having the same fight, but in different places of the world. And, it's just always good to have that moment to connect and give that, you're doing it too, I'm doing it too. I appreciate you. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for what you guys are doing. I mean that. I mean, look, we have to be in this thing together. There's power in numbers, and there's that synergistic effect of people coming together. And there's other people that, look, most people are risk averse. They don't want to be called names. They don't want to be getting a fight. They're like, oh, I just got to pay the bills, and I got to go to work, and I got to come back home, and I got to cut the grass, and the dog's barking too much, and it's crazy. And I get it. Life's tough, man. No one said it's going to be easy, but it's worth it. I mean, this issue is that important. I mean, it is literally, as we know, the numbers, I think, justify the statement that it's an epidemic, autism, not to mention all the other things that we're dealing with. Our kids are sick.
Right.
I mean, our kids are sick, Doc, are we not? I mean, I don't know how long you've been practicing, but I mean, that kids in our day, we're dealing with different ailments than today. Well, if we have superior health care, and it's disease management, we know that's not health care. But I mean, if we have superior health care, then you would think that kids would be better off today, and they're not.
Yeah, we should be getting more and more healthy. And
more vaccines should be better, right?
And we're getting worse.
That's right. I mean, again, it's logically inconsistent. It doesn't make sense. The more vaccines, the sicker we are. But somehow it's the very small percentage of those kids that aren't vaccinated that are screwing it up for everybody else. That's you see this it just surpasses any logic. So thank you for what you're doing. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate it. I always say this to when I teach biblically about the Christian worldview, or in this. There is a statute in Texas. It's called endangering a child. And what it means is, if you leave a child that cannot take care of themselves in an environment that can hurt themselves, then the parent, the guardian, the person responsible for that kid can be held accountable for endangering a child. And if it's serious, causing serious bodily injury or death, or just, endangering that child. And I always think to myself, are we guilty, not just spiritually, but societally? Are we guilty of endangering our children? Are we guilty because we're not standing up and we're not doing what we can to make it a little better for them, to take on the fight that they can't fight? Whether they're young or whether they're vaccine injured, they can't fight. And I'm called as a Christian to fight for the people that can't fight for themselves.
Right.
That's my duty. That's my heavenly responsibility down here on earth. One of them. There's many of them, but that's one of them. And so I'm going to fulfill that first and foremost. That's why the worldly fights are nothing to me. They mean everything to me, but what I'm saying is they don't intimidate me. And so we're called to do that. And so I don't want to be guilty of endangering my children, because I worry about the world that I'm leaving them back in. Politically, we talked about politics and the insanity of politics today. We talked about ideology, and we are in a civil war of ideologies as we speak today. We are in a civil war. Absolute. It's a battle of ideologies. And if you're not trying to persuade somebody, guess what? They're persuading you. And if you're quiet, they won. It's always about persuasion. Either they're persuading you or you're persuading them. Well, I don't want to share my opinion. Then guess what? You just lost. You lost the persuasion battle because you were persuaded to keep your mouth shut.
Right. Absolutely.
So thank you for what you guys do, man. I really mean that sincerely. And I hope that you'll make time and I'll treat you to lunch. I said it on the air, so now it's my responsibility. We'll break some bread,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. We'll hold you to that. Well, that'll be great to get together with you in San Antonio. And, Nico, I think you're such an inspiration, especially to other men out there, because when we see someone like you be so vocal and passionate about this and to own your truth, and you know what the truth is about what happened to your family and what has happened to other kids when they suffer a severe vaccine injury, and you are going out there and you are rising up and being passionate about it. And I think that's a great lesson for other men, that we need to join the women in this fight.
There's
and
no excuse.
Not be quiet.
There's no excuse to be silent for anybody, any parent, any loved one, any colleague, any coworker, grandparent, anybody. There is no excuse to be silent. And we just so much.
I'm motivated by the women in this battle, and it's no different than the women that found Christ not in his tomb. And back then, if you study the times, women at the time, culturally, not biblically, but culturally, their opinion wasn't just, so the courage that these women had, that they went out there and spread the message, that Christ was not in his tomb and that he had risen. I mean, it's that same courage that is leading this fight. And so the men should be motivated by that and say, I'm going to jump on their bandwagon. Thank you for leading the charge, to my wife, to you, to all these other brave women that encourage us and educate us. And what a wonderful example. And you honor God and you honor your children by doing that. So thank all the women out there. I appreciate them very much.
Well, thank you, Nico. And we'll include, like a link to the podcast so that people can get for you and some information on that on the episode description on this. And I know our listeners are going to be thrilled to chat with you. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And hopefully we'll get to talk to you soon and see you in Texas on our...
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Thank you both. God bless you both. Thank you.
Care.
All right, you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on the vaccine conversation. And we will see you all next time.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult your healthcare professional for information on vaccines and infectious diseases.